Hey, Jason,
Yes, Gary.
do you mind if I just take a nap?
What kind of message would that send to the people, Gary?
I don't
If you
know.
slept.
But you've got 71 verses here.
71? You know,
71.
that's not that big of a number.
We did a scientific survey.
We did.
Plus or minus 1% error. How many people thought that Jason could finish 71 verses in 50 minutes? And guess what the result was?
I'd say that people are very confident in my abilities.
Okay, we'll go with that one.
But you're not even ready to go here.
Oh,
What's up?
I am so busy.
You're
doing
sabotaging me from
so
the
many
very
things.
start.
Okay, you go ahead and start, and I will.
Well, I don't know what to say if you don't put it up on the screen
Well,
for
tell
me.
them where we are.
Oh, Luke,
We're in Luke.
chapter 22.
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah. And I'm in chapter
23.
23, and
And then chapter 24 ends the book.
yeah.
So, but your announcement from earlier makes me consider the possibility that I might be teaching class alone next Sunday.
It makes you
Wednesday night.
nervous, doesn't it?
Well, not nervous, but you're going to have to teach chapter 23 from somewhere on the road or something.
Yeah, that'll work great.
So maybe you could phone in and
We could
make,
do that.
make a guest appearance.
Yeah, I could do that.
That's been
we
done
could
before.
Zoom.
That's been done before.
We could Zoom it. Yeah, that was a good appearance that last time someone telephoned in and connected
You
with us.
kept
on
turning
that.
me off though.
The technology didn't cooperate. So we are in chapters 22 and
23,
23
hopefully.
of the Gospel of Luke.
Yes, gospel according to Luke. But we will see indications tonight that this is where we've been headed all along.
We've been headed toward this direction.
We are
and
right where we're supposed to be.
We are arriving
Yeah.
at where we want to be.
Yep. So it starts out slow, verses 1 and 2. Now the feast of unleavened bread, which is called the Passover, was approaching, and the chief priests and the scribes were seeking how they might put him to death, for they were afraid of the people. So the Passover was approaching, and the Passover, of course, is the feast of the Jews that they had when they were exiting from
I like exodusing.
Yeah. From Egyptian captivity, and it was the night of the death angel went through the camp, killed all of the Egyptian firstborn, and they had the blood on the doorpost and all those things. So just a coincidence that Jesus' sacrifice happens to fall on the anniversary of and celebration of that,
What a coincidence.
of that, because Jesus is leading us out of slavery to sin, and it's his blood that saves us from the death
And he's
that
our-
sin
he's our
requires.
Passover
He is our
lamb.
Passover lamb. Behold the Lamb of God that takes away the sins of the world.
That
Oh
is-
my, we don't want to
Do
update,
change. No, we just do change.
change the color scheme?
Yeah, it'd be all right.
Okay.
We may have to connect again.
That was not all right.
Yeah, it's okay.
It's okay, all right.
I think we'll do the technology here. I don't know why it does that.
I think it's kind of ironic that the Jews, the chief priests and scribes are seeking how they might put him to death because he feared the people. And that's exactly why Pilate gave in, was because he feared the people. I think it's kind of ironic.
You know,
It is.
the fickleness of the people is something that we should not miss in the story, because in the chapters leading up to this, the chief priests and the scribes and the Pharisees, they're all being very careful how they deal with Jesus, because they don't want the people to turn against them. But it seems that very, very quickly they are able to turn the crowds against Jesus. And as soon as they finally are able to arrest him and bring him up on charges, then all of a sudden now the crowds are chanting for his death rather than praising him. You know, just a few days earlier they were praising him, and the Pharisees were saying, "Tell the people to be quiet." And Jesus said, "If they're quiet, the rocks will cry out." Well, now it's going to switch on a dime. And so, you know, the court of popular opinion is fickle, and we might have the crowds on our side one minute and against us the next minute, and that's not a good judge of the rightness or wrongness of a situation, whether or not a big crowd of people supports you. And this is a good reminder of that. But the chief priests and the scribes were plotting, and they were doing so somewhat surreptitiously, kind of in a roundabout way, because they did fear the people. That what they feared was that the people would leave them and support Jesus, and that if the people turned against them, they would lose their power. And so they had to be careful with how they dealt with Jesus while Jesus had the crowd's support. Otherwise, they could lose the crowd's support.
This is not cooperating.
Something is not sinking.
It is not sinking.
I've got a sinking feeling.
I do too. How about that? No, that's way ahead.
We're way ahead now. I can just does that? No, that's even too far ahead.
Yeah.
We got to find verse 3.
This is a good day to have this happen. We have all
We
this
have
extra time.
we have a lot. That's too far behind. Right there it is. Okay, moving on to verses 3 through 6. But they can't see verses 3 through 6. We got to just go with that.
Yeah, but they can't see it. We're gonna read.
Oh,
We're gonna reboot here.
okay. I thought that was okay.
Yeah, that they only see what's up here.
We need to fill out a help ticket.
Jason,
I need a help ticket.
There we go. Yes, Randy.
you know what you were saying about people being fickle and them listening to what the people want to say reminds me a lot of the situation today, especially the political situation. It seems like our leaders make a lot of their decisions based on what the polls say, and not necessarily what is right or wrong.
That's exactly right. The comment is that many of our politicians today make decisions based on what the polls say, and boy, those can change almost overnight sometimes, depending on the news stories and how they go, and
And they may not be correct.
and yeah,
That's the other thing. They may not even be. The polls may not be correct. They may be manufactured anyway.
they may be
so-
manipulated or manufactured anyway. So,
Depending on how they ask the question.
oh yeah,
it's
Yeah.
So skewed.
right.
It depends on how they ask a question and what audience they choose to ask, and yes.
I don't know if they were 100% fickle. I think they were disappointed because it wasn't who they thought he was. He wasn't going to be this liberating king that they so agreed that he was. He was exactly what Scripture said he was.
Right.
But they missed that. He was not being what they wanted him to be.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
As soon as, especially once they knew he was the end of death, well, obviously he isn't going to give us what we want.
Yeah, that's a great comment, that Jesus was not the Messiah that they planned for, that they put their faith in. He was not doing what they thought he should do, and when he didn't lead a military uprising,
Well, you have to define
We
who
turned
they
on it.
is.
well, the crowds, yeah.
Well, not really, but they would be more the scribes and the Pharisees and the Sadducees. They were the ones who wanted Jesus to. I mean, everybody kind of wanted it, but
Yeah.
those in particular wanted him to be a rising
Yeah.
against Rome.
And I think we'll see some indications here, even tonight. We've seen them before, that the scribes and the Pharisees really don't care who Jesus is. If he's not playing according to their rules. It doesn't matter if he is the true Messiah or not. If he's not going to give them their due place, then they're going to resist him no matter what he does or what he stands for. So we see that at the resurrection of Lazarus. They had just seen Lazarus, who'd been dead for 4 days, raised from the dead. They didn't care that happened. They wanted to know how to silence Jesus.
And they also said that they wanted to silence Lazarus because he was bad publicity.
Right.
The guy was raised from the dead,
Yeah.
so we need to kill him.
Yeah.
If you kill him, what are they going to do? What's Jesus going to do?
Raise him again.
Raise him again. That's not going to help your cause.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, verses 3 through 6. And Satan entered into Judas, who was called Iscariot, belonging to the number of the 12, and he went away and discussed with the chief priests and officers how he might betray him to them. And they were glad and agreed to give him money, and he consented and began seeking a good opportunity to betray him to them apart from the crowd. So Satan entered into Judas. Let's be clear that this was not against Judas's will. This was not something that Judas had no control over. Judas was tempted, and he went with it. And so it wasn't a matter of Judas being denied his opportunity to say no to this temptation.
He wasn't just a real great guy that Satan grabbed a hold of. We know from other gospels that he was stealing from the treasury. He was the treasurer for the apostles, and he was stealing money from there. And Satan just took advantage of his character.
Right.
And Judas opened the door.
Yeah. And so Judas enters into a deal with those who are conspiring against Jesus. They agreed. They're happy to have his help. They're looking for a way to, to do this kind of on the down low, on the side, and having an inside man that's going to be able to tell them where Jesus is. Jesus doesn't hide from them. Jesus isn't being sneaky. He's in public all day, every day. He's at the temple. He's in public places. They have the opportunity to do what they want to do if they're willing to do it publicly. But what they want is the opportunity to do it privately, and they don't know where Jesus is going at night, where he's spending his time away from the people, and that's what Judas gives them access to. So he seeks that opportunity to betray them apart from the crowd, away out of sight. Verses 7 to 13. Then came the first day of the unleavened bread, on which the Passover lamb had to be sacrificed, and he sent Peter and John, saying, "Go and prepare the Passover for us, that we may eat it." They said to him, "Where do you want us to prepare it?" And he said to them, "Behold, when you have entered the city, a man will meet you carrying a pitcher of water. Follow him into the house that he enters." Sorry about that. Okay, that's all right. You're faster than me. "And you shall say to the owner of the house, the teacher says to you, where is the guest room in which I may eat the Passover with my disciples? And he will show you a large furnished upper room. Prepare it there." And they departed and found everything just as he had told them, and they prepared the Passover. So it's the first day of the Passover. The Passover is not just celebrated on one day. It was a process that they commemorated the eating of the Passover meal one evening, and then the Passover itself took place the next day. The departure from Egyptian captivity took place the day after the eating of that Passover meal. So that day is that first day is when they slay the lamb. They eat the meal. It's done in a very scripted, prescribed manner. How they cook it, how they eat it, the prayers that they say, the order in which they do things. It's all very scripted. And Jesus sends John and Peter to prepare that meal, because it's not just a matter of, hey, we're having some people over, let's throw some stuff together. All of the proprieties have to be honored. They have to do it in the proper way. So there's all of this tradition and custom and things that go into it. So it needs a preparation thought of ahead of time. So Jesus gives directions to Peter and John. How do we know where to go? Where are we going to go for this place that we celebrate it? And Jesus tells them, you'll walk into the city, you'll see a guy carrying a pitcher of water. Follow him. He'll take you where you need to go. And if he asks about it, just say, Jesus sent you. And he'll lead you to a place that's prepared. And that's exactly what happens. Once again, as I said at the beginning, several things happen through this chapter that let us know this is exactly where we're supposed to be. All along the way, it's just Jesus giving us these little signals that all of this is planned out and scripted. It's none of it is a surprise or an accident.
And last week we saw the colt that he rode into town on.
Right.
Same thing. You go, take the colt. If they ask what you're doing, you say the master needs it, and they'll say, okay.
Right. Verses 14 to 23. And when the hour had come, he reclined at the table, and the apostles with him. And he said to them, I have earnestly desired to eat this Passover with you before I suffer. For I say to you, I shall never eat it again, and never again eat it until it is fulfilled in the kingdom of God. And when he had taken a cup and given thanks, he said, take this and share it among yourselves. For I say to you, I will not drink of the fruit of the vine from now on until the kingdom of God comes. And when he had taken some bread and given thanks, he broke it and gave it to them, saying, this is my body which is given for you. Do this in remembrance of me. And in the same way he took the cup after they had eaten, saying, this cup which is poured out for you is the new covenant in my blood. But behold, the hand of the one betraying me is with me on the table. For indeed the Son of Man is going as it has been determined, but woe to that man by whom he is betrayed. And they began to discuss among themselves which of them it might be who was going to do this thing. So the hour had come, and again, just all these little indications throughout this whole chapter that things are following God's prescribed plan. This is exactly as God has determined it's going to happen. The hour has come. It's time to begin the process that's going to lead to Jesus' crucifixion. Jesus has earnestly desired that. Imagine Jesus, he knows what's about to happen. He knows what comes after this. He knows the betrayal is coming. He knows the trial is coming. He knows the beatings, the crucifixion, the separation from God. All of that is coming. And yet his attitude is, I have earnestly desired this. How can that be? How could he earnestly desire the things that are about to take place? Yes, it's his Father's will. That's the bottom line. It's God's will. And Jesus is so in tune with God and so just all about doing God's will that even though it's going to lead to his own pain, his own suffering, it's God's will. And that's something that we desire. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. And yet he yielded to God's will. He submitted all along the way to God's will. That's right.
And one of the things that he's earnestly desired is this fellowship with his apostles. Was the possibility to sit down and have the Passover with them this one time. And he just really desired that fellowship
Right.
with his followers.
And the scene that we have in the book of John that gives us a much more detailed account of the time that they spend at this supper from John chapter 13 through 17. It all takes place in that upper room, and it's it's an extended discourse, an extended time of fellowship that Jesus has with his disciples at this point. He blessed and distributed the cup, then he blessed and broke the bread, then he blessed and distributed the cup. So sometimes when people read through Luke, there's a little bit of misunderstanding or confusion about the process or the order in which this Passover supper is observed. And as I said a moment ago, there was a very scripted, prescribed way in which the Passover meal itself was carried out. And all through that Passover meal, there were breaks along the way. There were prayers, there were songs, there were psalms that were read or participated in. There was food that was eaten in a specific order. And along the way, there was ceremonial drinking of the fruit of the vine. And I think is one of the things I read said there were 4 different occasions through that meal when there were a communal drink was shared as they observed that Passover meal. And so the meal ends with a final drinking of the fruit of the vine, and that's that first mention. Jesus, when he takes that cup, that was the end, the final moment of the actual Passover meal itself. And so Jesus distributes that, and that is the conclusion of the Passover. And then he institutes this new ceremony, this new rite of he blesses, blesses and breaks the bread, declares that is his body that's to be done in remembrance of what's about to happen with his body. And then he takes the cup, and now something that has not been done as part of the Passover before, another final passing of that cup that is associated with the Lord's Supper. And that is the cup of the new covenant. And consider what's just taken place. It's that final observance of the Passover under the old law before Jesus goes to the cross, and they've carried out that ceremony in the way that it's been prescribed, in the way that their ancestors have done so for 1,000 years. No, well, not quite 1,000 years, but for a long, or no, longer than that, longer than that. For longer than that, and there's been that final passing of that cup as the signifying of the end of that, and now Jesus passes that cup again and says, this cup is the cup of the new covenant. This is a new tradition. This is a new ceremony that I'm instituting that is to remind you of my blood. It's no longer the blood of the Passover lamb that we're symbolizing, that we're thinking about. It's my blood that we're symbolizing. And so this is a watershed moment. This is a pivotal moment in the development of Christian theology. It's of the things that we do even today, 2,000 years later. This is when Jesus set that into motion. He then, after that moment of installing this new ceremony, he foretells his betrayal and says that the hand of the one who is going to betray him is at the table with him. That narrows it down to one of the 12. That's who was in the upper room. He was there with his 12. And then they discuss, well, who could this be? Because they can't fathom that one of them would be a betrayer. They can't understand it. And so that surely had to be a source of discussion and wonderment on their behalf. Verses 24 to 27, there arose also a dispute among them as to which of them was regarded to be the greatest. And he said to them, the kings of the Gentiles lord it over them, and those who have authority over them are called benefactors. But not so with you. Let him who is the greatest among you become as the youngest, and the leader as the servant. For who is greater, the one who reclines at the table or the one who serves? Is it not the one who reclines at the table? But I am among you as the one who serves. So a dispute about who is the greatest, and it's, I mean, we've talked before about timelines of things in Luke, and sometimes as Luke portrays things, it's not always consecutively done as we would relate a story. That's the way we relate stories. Sometimes Luke rearranges details a little bit. And I've always wondered about this. Is this the very next thing that they talk about? After they've just had this discussion, Jesus says, one of you is going to betray me. Well, who's going to betray you? Not me. I'm the greatest. And it's an interesting progression that Luke puts in there. I'm not going to be the one to betray him because I'm the best disciple. I'm the greatest one. So it can't be me. It's got to be one of you 11 because one of you is less than me, right? And so Jesus immediately has the opportunity then to discuss with them the idea of who's going to be first really is the one that serves, really is the one that, that puts others before himself. And I think in John chapter 13, this is probably where he would have washed their feet.
Exactly. I was going to say,
Yeah.
I think that's where this fits right in here
Yeah.
in John 13, where it seems a little bit out of place, spontaneous, that he just gets up and starts washing their feet. But it makes perfect sense in this context.
Yeah. And so he demonstrates to them, look, who is the one who is greatest? And they all recognize him as the greatest. He's the Messiah. They've all confessed that. They have all seen demonstrations of that. They've all followed him because they believe that he's the Messiah. And here he is saying, I have the right. Of all the people in this room, I'm the one that has the right to call myself the greatest. And yet, how do I come to you? I come to you as a servant. I don't come to you demanding that you acknowledge me as the greatest. And so he puts them in their place, so to speak. Verses 28 to 34 says, and you are those who have stood by me in my trials, and just as my Father has granted me a kingdom, I grant you that you may eat and drink at my table in my kingdom. And you will sit on thrones judging the 12 tribes of Israel. Simon, Simon, behold, Satan has demanded permission to sift you like wheat, but I have prayed for you, that your faith may not fail, and you, when once you have turned again, strengthen your brothers. And he said to him, Lord, with you I'm ready to go both to prison and to death. And he said, I say to you, Peter, the cock will not crow today until you've denied me 3 times that you know me. So the disciples have stood by Jesus, and I love that he acknowledges that. They have been with him. Remember in John chapter 11, before they go to Lazarus, they've heard that Lazarus is sick, but Jesus tarries. He doesn't go right away. And then finally he hears that Lazarus has died, and he decides to go, and basically the disciples are saying, well, what are we going to do? And I think it's Thomas that says, we're going to go with him and die. I mean, if we go to Jerusalem, they're going to kill him, but he's going, and we're going with him. And so they stand by him through all of the trials that he's been through.
And I think when Jesus said, we're going to Lazarus, to him, some of them understood that, meaning he's dead.
Right, yeah.
We're going to join him.
Yeah, we're going to join him. And Thomas said, well, we're with you, Jesus. Yeah. That's where we're going to. And it's interesting to me, too, to hear that Jesus has just chastised them. He's just rebuked them for arguing over who is the greatest. And then Jesus said, you've all stood by me through difficult times, and you're all going to have a place at my table. And you're going to rule over the 12 tribes of Israel. Basically is what he says. You're going to sit in judgment over the thrones of the 12 tribes. So on the one hand, rebukes them for thinking more highly of themselves than they should, but then also takes that opportunity to elevate them and to lift them up and say, you do have a special place in my kingdom. You are important to the work that I'm doing and important to the mission and the ministry that is left to carry out.
That's a little bit of a parallel to Jesus, because Jesus said that I am the servant, but he's going to be lifted up. And
Right.
He is our servant, but we don't regard him as a servant. We regard him as Lord because he deserves it.
Yeah.
That's kind of what he does with the disciples.
It is, and it strikes me too as being an example of, while they were bickering amongst themselves, trying to elevate themselves, they needed to be humbled. They needed to be rebuked. But when it's Jesus that does the elevating, that's God honoring them in a way that they could never achieve for themselves anyway. And so that's the appropriate honor that needs to be bestowed upon them, not one that they seek for themselves. Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right. Yeah, he wants us to be that servant washing feet serving others, not elevating ourselves, and allowing him that opportunity to elevate us. That's good. Another interesting exchange on a personal level with Peter. Satan has demanded the opportunity to sift Peter like wheat, and that's an interesting phrase. It's an interesting, I mean, think of Satan demanding, first of all. What is that process even like? That Satan stands before God and demands the right to tempt Peter, to challenge Peter's authority, to challenge who Peter is as Jesus' disciple. And yet, to some degree, that request, that demand, is allowed because Peter is tempted. But Jesus prays for Peter, and that is that's a remarkable statement. Consider all that Jesus has on his plate at the moment, and what he's going to be praying in just a few minutes from now, when he's praying for the opportunity for that cup to pass from him. And yet he takes time to pray for Peter, and the weight that prayer must have carried as the Son of God is praying for Peter. Peter's response is typical Peter. Lord, I am with you. I'm ready to go both to prison and to death. And I don't doubt Peter's sincerity. I think Peter demonstrates in the garden that Peter is willing to go to prison and death. When he strikes, as we'll see here in a minute, when Peter strikes the high priest's servant, that if you strike the high priest's servant, you are striking the high priest. That's a punishable by death. That there's no way around that. When Peter strikes the servant of the high priest, he forfeits his life. And so Peter demonstrates that he's ready to die for Jesus. But he's not ready to go the route Jesus wants him to go, which is tougher still. Mm-hmm. It's one thing to be ready to die, but it's another thing to be ready to live in a way that you weren't expected to live.
I always think of this. Peter was willing to die, but was he willing to live?
Right.
And I think all of us would be willing to die for Jesus. If someone held a gun to our head and said, deny Jesus or I'm going to shoot you, we say, pull the trigger.
Yeah.
But it's on a day-to-day basis as we live our lives. Are we willing to confess him then in our lives? Are we willing to live for Jesus? And there's a difference between being willing to die for Jesus and willing to live for him.
And Jesus requires of Peter the more difficult of the choices. And Peter has to learn through this. So I love what Jesus says to him: when you turn back, when you return, remember to minister to the others, because they're going to need your leadership. They're going to need your support through this. And Jesus tells him, before you hear the rooster crow, you will have denied me 3 times. And that is important foreshadowing of what's going to come here in a few minutes. Verse 35 to 38 says, and he said to them, when I sent you out without a purse and a bag and sandals, you did not lack anything, did you? And they said, no, nothing. And he said to them, but now let him who has a purse take it along, likewise also a bag, and let him who has no sword sell his robe and buy one. For I tell you that this which is written must be fulfilled in me. And he was numbered with the transgressors, for that which refers to me has its fulfillment. And they said, look, Lord, look, here are 2 swords. And he said to them, it is enough. So Jesus reminds them of the limited commission. We read that back in Luke chapter 10 several weeks ago, where Jesus in that instance basically tells them the exact opposite of what he's telling them here. Don't take a purse, don't take a coat, don't take 2 changes of clothes, don't prepare a place to stay ahead of time. Just go out and trust that God's going to provide for you as you go out and work in his field. But now the instructions are reversed. If you have money, take it with you. If you have a change of clothes, take it. If you don't have a sword, trade in one of your spare coats and get a sword. Be ready for the conflict that is coming. And so it's interesting that now it's for real. Last time was a trial run. It was a rehearsal. Now the kingdom is here. You were in the process of telling people, get ready for the kingdom to come. Now the kingdom's here. And so now it's not a dress rehearsal anymore.
The last time it was a limited commission, and urgency was the key.
Uh-huh.
They needed to get out and get it done, come back. Now they're in for the long haul.
Right. Sustainability is what we're after now.
Exactly.
And so they need the resources to get out there and be full-time workers in the kingdom. And so this is, they say in response to what Jesus said, Jesus tells them, if you don't have a sword, trade in a coat and get a sword. And in response to that, they say, Lord, look, we have 2 swords. And Jesus says, well, that is enough. And there's some discussion on what he means here. Some read that as being, he's saying that's enough of that talk. We don't want to hear any more of that. I'm not sure about that because they seem to be saying, I mean, Jesus told them, go get a sword. And they say, well, look, we have to. And Jesus said, well, that's enough. And it's enough to get done what needs to be done right now, because when we look at what happens in the next part of the story, if they don't have a sword, then something's going to get left out. And so having 2 swords with them at this point is enough to get done the work that needs to be done at this point.
Yeah, I think it may be the first that he was speaking on a spiritual plane and they're responding on a physical plane. I don't think he cared how many physical swords they had with him. He just saying go out prepared for the long thing. And it's 3 words in English. It is enough. In Greek, it's just 1 word, which is enough.
Enough.
And so, if we're talking to somebody and say enough, there are lots of ways to interpret that.
Yeah.
And so, I think either one is possible.
Yeah.
I do think they've shifted from a spiritual plane to a physical plane, and that's not what he's talking about. He just wants them to go out prepared for the long haul.
Yeah. And I could go either way on that. It is an interesting discussion.
And the swords weren't necessarily for offense or defense. They used them, like a machete to gather wood along the way and to do a lot of things. And so it wasn't necessarily an aggressive tool.
A armor.
It wasn't a weapon. It was a necessary tool if you're going to be traveling around.
Mm-hmm.
And so, in that case, 2 might have been sufficient for them to travel around, except they're going to be splitting up.
Verses 39 to 46, and he came out and proceeded, as was his custom, to the Mount of Olives, and the disciples also followed him. When he arrived at the place, he said to them, pray that you may not enter into temptation. And he withdrew from them about a stone's throw, and he knelt down and began to pray, saying, Father, if thou art willing, remove this cup from me, yet not my will, but thine be done. Now an angel from heaven appeared to him, strengthening him. And being in agony, he was praying very fervently, and his sweat became like drops of blood falling down upon the ground. When he arose from prayer, he came to the disciples, found them sleeping from sorrow, and said to them, why are you sleeping? Rise and pray that you may not enter into temptation. So as was his custom, he retired to the Mount of Olives. So this is not a super secret hideout. This is not his fortress of solitude or his, that kind of thing where he retired and had a defensible position where he could fight off the attacking hordes. This was his custom to go into this. It's not a particularly remote place. It's just outside the city, and it was not hard to find. But he went to the Mount of Olives, and there, just think, how many times did the word pray happen, or prayer happen in that short reading there? He went there, and all of this is according to his custom. It's not just his custom to go there and sleep. It's his custom to go there and pray. And it was a tranquil place where he could do that. And so Jesus prayed. In response to that prayer, an angel appears to him and strengthens him. That's kind of one of those moments we saw at the Transfiguration where Moses and Elijah were there with Jesus discussing things with him, and here it's an angel, a messenger from God, who is standing with him and strengthening him for the things that are about to happen. He sweats as great drops of blood, which there's a lot of discussion too about that. Was it literal drops of blood where you're so stressed that your body, the capillaries open up and you actually bleed through the skin? And think of what that would do. Or was it just his sweat was running to the point that it was as if it was running like he had been cut and drops of blood were dripping? So I don't know that there's a definitive answer to that. Either way, it signifies the stress that he was under and the fervency with which he was praying. And while he's doing that, the disciples sleep. It's a turn of events when they were on the boat and the disciples were all awake and worried about what was going to happen, and Jesus was sleeping. Mm-hmm. And here it is, Jesus is not worried, but he is demonstrating his stress over the things that are about to happen, and yet the disciples sleep. And Jesus wakes them and instructs them once again to pray because they were supposed to be praying, but they fell asleep. And Jesus wakes them and say, pray that you don't enter into temptation. And it's interesting that he doesn't say, you're supposed to be praying for me here. That's not what he said. He said, you're supposed to be praying for yourselves, that they would not enter into temptation. So they were missing that opportunity. Verses 47 to 53. While he was still speaking, behold, a multitude came, and the one called Judas, one of the 12, was preceding them, and he approached Jesus to kiss him. But Jesus said to him, Judas, are you betraying the Son of Man with a kiss? And when those who were around him saw what was going to happen, they said, Lord, shall we strike with the sword? And a certain one of them struck the slave of the high priest and cut off his right ear. But Jesus answered and said, "Stop, no more of this." And he touched his ear and healed him. And Jesus said to the chief priests and officers of the temple and elders who had come against him, "Have you come out with swords and clubs as against a robber? While I was with you daily in the temple, you did not lay hands on me, but this hour and the power of darkness are yours." So while he was still speaking, at that moment, it's almost like he knew what was about to happen. But Jesus is waking his disciples, telling them to pray. He's got this final last moment with them. He knows the time is now, and he doesn't want them to be surprised out of sleep by what's about to happen. So he wakes them preemptively and gives them that last moment of reflection and prayer. Judas leads the crowd and comes in to betray Jesus with a kiss. And it seems from Luke's perspective here that Jesus does not permit that. Other gospel accounts seem to say that Judas did kiss him, but how offensive is that? Not only that, I mean, it would have been bad enough had Judas popped out from behind a tree and said, "There he is, seize him." I mean, that would have been horrible, but to step in as though he's going to greet Jesus and betray him with a kiss is just despicable. He tells him, to go ahead and kiss him, or he tells him what you do quickly.
Yeah, what you do quickly.
He tells him that in the upper room when Judas leaves. Yeah, so it's Judas's perspective on this is interesting. It's skewed, and so Jesus, basically rebukes Judas there. It's not right what you're doing, and you're not going to get away with it, kind of thing. Those who were with Jesus were ready to fight. They ask, "Is this what we've been waiting for?" Here is the Jewish leadership, represented by the scribes and the servant of the high priest. I mean, it doesn't get any more establishment leadership than that. And they are backed by a consort of Roman military. The two forces that need to be overthrown in order for a physical restoration of the Jewish kingdom. And here they are. Jesus, is this the moment we've been waiting for? Is this the time when we're supposed to take up arms and all that neat magical power you've been doing to demonstrate that you are the Son of God, and you've been healing, and you've been controlling nature, and you've been doing all this cool stuff? Is this the time that you're going to put that power to work to put the Roman army and the Jewish leadership in their place where they belong? Mm-hmm. We're ready. And to demonstrate that we're ready, it is not identified as Peter here, but in other Gospels it is Peter that takes the sword and chops off the ear of Malchus, the high priest's servant. And this is where Jesus says, "Enough.
Yep.
No more of that. That's not what this is about. You're thinking in physical terms. This is a spiritual battle." And so Jesus heals him. How do you continue after that? How are you Malchus? And you say, "Okay, now that my ear's healed, we'll go ahead and arrest him." I've always, if I had one of the guys there in this moment that I could talk to, I think I'd pull Malchus aside and say, "What are you thinking that you're going to continue with this?" So Jesus questions the officers. He asks them, "While I was with you daily in the temple, why did you not do this in the presence of the crowds? But now this hour and the darkness are yours," signifying that their deeds need to be covered by darkness. And that reminded me of John chapter 3, verses 19 to 21. "And this is the judgment, that the light has come into the world, and men love the darkness rather than the light, for their deeds were evil. For everyone who does evil hates the light and does not come to the light, lest his deeds should be exposed. But he who practices the truth comes to the light, that his deeds may be manifested as having been wrought by God." What Jesus did, he did in the light. He did at the temple. He did in public view for everyone to see. The healing, the miracles, all of those things were done out in the open where people could see it and they could pass judgment on what he was doing. But here these people come to him at night under the cover of darkness because their deeds are evil and because they need that cover of darkness to conceal the lies that they are perpetrating. So, just by that, we see who the good guy is in this story. Verses 54 to 62 says, "And having arrested him, they led him away and brought him to the house of the high priest. But Peter was following at a distance. And after they had kindled a fire in the middle of the courtyard and had sat down together, Peter was sitting among them. And a certain servant girl, seeing him as he sat in the firelight and looking intently at him, said, 'This man was with him too.' But he denied it, saying, 'Woman, I did not know him.' And a little later, another saw him and said, "You are one of them too." But Peter said, "Man, I am not." And after about an hour had passed, another man began to insist, saying, "Certainly this man also was with him, for he is a Galilean too." But Peter said, "Man, I do not know what you are talking about." And immediately, while he was still speaking, a cock crowed. The Lord turned and looked at Peter, and Peter remembered the word of the Lord, how he had told him, "Before a cock crows today, you will deny me 3 times." And he went out and wept bitterly. So Jesus was taken to the house of the high priest. Peter followed at a distance. Peter sat down with those in the courtyard. And I don't know structurally what this would have looked like, but it was an open area where there was room for a crowd to gather, and there was a fire there for them to warm themselves. Peter here denies 3 different occasions when people ask him, "Aren't you one of them?" And Peter denies it 3 times, vehemently denies it. And then a rooster crows, and simultaneously Jesus, however this situation is situated, Peter he can see Jesus. He can see what's taking place. He can see the beating that Jesus is taking. He can see the mocking. More than an hour has passed between the second time that Peter denies him and the third time. They're not just sitting there idly during this time. This sham trial that Jesus is undertaking is going on. Jesus has been beaten at this point. He has been mocked. He has been spat upon. And in the midst of all that, he knows that Peter has denied him. And as Peter denies him that third time, Jesus turns and looks at him. And I can't imagine being Peter, and yet we're all Peter. I mean, we all are Peter. And every time we sin, every time we deny Jesus, Jesus looks at us. Jesus is seeing what we've done. He understands the denial. He understands the sin. And he knows. And Peter has the only response that is appropriate. I mean, he goes out and he weeps bitterly. I can't imagine.
You know, it'd be a good topic for a Sunday morning sermon.
What?
I am not ashamed of the gospel.
That would be a wonderful topic.
What book's that found in?
Well, Romans would be one of them.
What book are we talking about this next Sunday?
This Sunday, Romans.
Awesome. I'll have to work on that.
You're going to preach my sermon, aren't you? Because I'm not going to be here Sunday.
I got your sermon, but I made up my own.
Okay.
Same
Well.
title, different verse.
All right. How could you use a different verse?
No, not verse
Okay.
in the Bible.
Okay.
As in a song.
Okay.
First verse, second
Okay.
verse, third verse. No,
wait a minute.
same verse.
Okay. All right. Good. Well, good. So you'll
That
all
just,
get
that
to
just
hear
made
it
me think
Sunday.
that might be a
Okay.
good subject for a sermon if I can get it together.
Yeah.
If not, I'll just use yours.
Okay. You're welcome to use it.
But that's what's happening.
Yeah.
When we're ashamed of
Peter
the
is
gospel.
ashamed, and he denies it. He denies his association with Jesus. And then, as ashamed as he is of that association, once he realizes what he has done, that shame is greater.
Mm-hmm.
And it's appropriate that shame is greater.
And went out and wept bitterly.
He went out and wept bitterly.
Yeah.
Yeah. That,
something like this really brings it back to reality.
yeah.
I mean, he probably forgot all about, what Jesus said.
Uh-huh.
I imagine he probably forgot about that until it happened. And it was
Right.
like, oh, it's got to be.
Well, yeah. You think of what he's been through in the last several hours. From the moment that Jesus told him, "You're going to betray me," and Peter's response to that is, "No, I won't. I'm going to die for you tonight." And then Peter tries to die for Jesus. He attacks the priest of the servant of the high priest. He tries. He's trying to commit suicide.
Yeah.
He's trying to die for Jesus in that moment, and Jesus puts a stop to it. Plus, in between there, he had slept, so he might have forgotten something while he slept. But he tries to go as far as he said he would go. And then when Jesus is arrested, that you talk about your world shifting, like a moment in time when your perspective and your understanding and your world just shifts. And that in that moment when those irons go on Jesus' hands and they shackle him and they lead him off and the disciples flee, the disciples run. 10 minutes before that happened, they could never have imagined that would happen. Their lives change so dramatically in that moment that I'm sure Peter had forgotten that Jesus had said that until he heard that rooster crow. He couldn't remember very much of anything because everything had changed so dramatically.
Would you call that a paradigm shift?
Yes.
His whole worldview changed because he thought that they were headed one way, and all of a sudden that was not going to work.
Yes. And it was, it was an earthquake. It was it was Mount St. Helens going off in the middle of your life. Verses 63 to 65. And the men who were holding Jesus in custody were mocking him and beating him, and they blindfolded him and were asking him, "Prophesy, who is the one who hit you?" And they were saying many other things against him, blaspheming. This is all going on. This is kind of one of those, chronology things where it's not necessarily that now that Peter has left, all of this starts to take place. This has been going on while Peter is watching. He's being beaten. He's being mocked. They're making sport of him. They're making fun of him. You claim to be a prophet. You claim to be able to do these great miraculous things. If we put a blindfold on you, can you tell us who punched you? That's just not nice.
That's not
none
nice
of it's
at
wrong.
all.
It's all wrong. It's all being done under the cover of darkness. This is a sham of a trial. It's really not even a trial. It's just a mockery. It's a staged event. They were blaspheming against him, and Jesus is God, so anything that denies him would automatically be blasphemy, and it's showing the degradation and the depths of their sin.
The technical terminology for this is meanwhile back at the ranch.
Yeah.
That's the technical.
Okay, I missed that. That must lost in translation. Verses 66 to 71. I'm going to make it.
You're going to make it, but I'm not.
And when it was day, the council of elders of the people assembled, both chief priests and scribes, and they led him away to their council chamber, saying, "If you are the Christ, tell us." But he said to them, "If I tell you, you will not believe, and if I ask a question, you will not answer. But from now on, the Son of Man will be seated at the right hand of the power of God." And they all said, "Are you the Son of God then?" And he said to them, "Yes, I am." And they said, "What further need do we have of testimony? For we have heard it ourselves from his own mouth." So it's after daylight now. So this is, I don't know what time he was arrested. I don't know if we're ever given that information. I don't recall that from the other Gospels. But, through the night watches, all of this sham of a trial is taking place. They're beating him. They're torturing him. And at daylight, the elders were assembled. So remember that there were some elders who were sympathetic to Jesus. We know of some. Nicodemus. There are others who call into question the validity of the trial that's taken place and the things that are being done because they know this is not right. Even if they're not necessarily defenders of Jesus, they know that what's taking place is wrong. And so now, finally, daylight comes, and now it's legal. What happens now is going to be illegal. It's going to fit, even though what they've done up to this point has been illegal. Now it's daylight, so we can have a legal conclusion to this trial. So if you are the Christ, tell us. Have they not been listening? He's been telling them for 3 years. He's been demonstrating it for 3 years.
That may be why he says, "If I tell you, you won't believe,"
Yeah,
because
so
he's been telling them and they don't believe.
What could Jesus have done in that moment that would have made them believe? He had just raised Lazarus from the dead. They didn't believe. They've seen him heal people. He didn't believe. They said there were people there, guards that were participating in the punching and the kicking and the blasphemy, had seen him heal Malchus's ear. What more could he do? There was nothing else that he could do. You won't believe no matter what happens. So he says, from this point forward, the Son of Man will be seated at the right hand of the power of God. This is all part of God's plan. Remember, all along here, we're given indications that everything that's taking place is part of God's plan. This is it. God is ready to bring this all to consummation. He's ready to bring it to the conclusion he's been demonstrating all along. They say, "Are you the Son of God?" And he answers plainly, "Yes, I am." There are those to this day who would deny that Jesus ever proclaimed to be the Son of God. There are some who say, no, the gospel accounts get it wrong. Jesus never really said he was the Son of God. It's all been taken out of context, and it doesn't mean what we think it means. Are you the Son of God? Yes, I am. Yeah. And before Abraham was, I am. I mean, there's just indication after indication that throughout the Gospels, if you're paying attention, that Jesus is the Son of God, and he demonstrates it over and over again. If you don't believe, it's a willful ignorance at this point.
And today, we can pretend to misunderstand what he was saying, but they did not misunderstand what he was saying when he said, the Father and I are one, or when he said, before Abraham was, I am, because they tried to stone him.
Every
because
time.
it says they understood he was making himself equal
Yeah.
to God. And so we may claim to misunderstand, but they didn't misunderstand.
Right.
They got it straight.
Yep. I would have to look at the original Greek
Yeah.
and then look up what it means because I don't read Greek, or at least I don't know the vocabulary. You say that I am is, yeah, but it's a statement not saying that that's what you say and we don't. We're going to leave it up in the air. He's confirming that, as you say, he's not denying it. He is saying, you say that I am, and it's true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is as you say.
It is. Yeah.
It is what you're saying is correct. It is as you say.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do we have time to do the next chapter?
Well, you have time to read Luke 23.
Okay.
Just Luke 23, right there on the next slide. That's all you have time for.
Okay.
So that means
not going.
no. I guess we don't have time.
Oh,
There we
okay.
go. Okay, Luke 23.
Did he ring
So-
the bell before we said it?
Yeah.
Oh man.
So I guess I'm picking up with Luke 23 next week.
I guess you are.
Okay.
I've already got it ready for you.
You got my notes ready for me?
Yeah, I got your notes ready. You just kind of go along here and follow right along.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you very much.
There's going to be an open seat up here next week if anybody